You are very welcome to a special episode of Flop Culture, the podcast where we mainly talk about flops. I'm your host, Fionnuala J. If you are a long-time listener, you'll be familiar with the regularly scheduled episodes of this podcast. This episode is going to be a little different, and it kind of kicks off a series of bonus episodes that I want to do occasionally. Usually I invite someone on to talk about one of their favourite flops. These episodes are going to be me talking about something that I'm desperate to talk about that I consider slightly floppy, slightly pop culture adjacent. And I'm going to bring in someone else who knows more than me to talk about it with me. So this is the first episode. This has been something that has been scratching at my brain for the last couple of months. And it was one of the main ideas that I had when I thought about this podcast. I was like, this is perfect. This is quintessential flop culture. And it is the entire, I suppose, cult isn't the right word, but this industry that has become celebrity boxing. And I suppose influencer boxing now is the thing, because if you're familiar with me at all, you know I enjoy a show called Love Island. And I had seen some Islanders more recently, I would say in the last year or two, definitely going into boxing as a way to kind of like diversify their income, raise their profile. And I find it really, really fascinating. And the world of influencing has created this other branch of celebrity boxing that never existed before. So I drafted in the 42's Gavan Casey to talk about it a little bit more with me. And we had a really good conversation. So stick around. We get into the sport, but this isn't ever going to become a sports podcast, I promise. Gav does that over in the 42. So if you want in on that, go over there, pay for their journalism. It's important. But before that, let's hear this conversation with myself and Gav. Gavan Casey, an absolute pleasure to have you on Flop Culture. How are you doing?
I'm absolutely flying, thanks, Fionnuala. How are you?
I'm good. This episode is a little bit different, as I'm sure people will glean. Usually I ask people to nominate a flop and they talk about it, but there was something kind of niggling away in the back of my brain that I wanted an excuse to talk about, but fundamentally also needed someone who is more qualified than I am in terms of sport to talk about it with. And I couldn't think of anyone more perfect than yourself to talk about the world of celebrity boxing and how it's evolved over the years.
Well, I'll tell you what, I can definitely talk about the boxing side of it. You can do the celebrities, and we'll be in and out in no time. No, it is an absolutely fascinating topic. And it's strange because it's one that doesn't at all interest me, which is a very, I guess maybe a harsh and a less than ideal thing to say at the top of a podcast about this very topic.
Gav, yeah, that's it. You're really selling it.
But it's one of those things that has permeated my day-to-day life to the extent that I have to pay attention to it, and I kind of have to know about it, and I need to understand the implications for what I would deem to be real boxing. And I also am not like vehemently against it. I'm not going to have this like curmudgeonly attitude towards it, I don't think. I mean, we'll see how the conversation unfolds. It's just one that like it wouldn't have crossed my radar if it didn't interfere with my job, if that makes sense, and if it didn't have ramifications or implications for boxing at large. So I'm looking forward to the chat because I feel as though you'll be able to teach me an awful lot about it as well. And hopefully by the end of it, between us, we'll have made sense of the entire thing.
Oh, absolutely. I've learned so much against my will, to be honest. Can we talk about like where this started? You know, the history of like why celebrities got involved in the first place. Like I have a few, with my pea-sized brain, I have a few ideas as to why boxing in particular, but can you give us a bit of like background on why the sport draws so many famous people in?
Yeah, I think it's difficult to pinpoint an exact start line for it, but I guess like if you think of Emma Lazarus's poem at the base of the Statue of Liberty, she says like, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, yearning to breathe free, the wretched refuse of your teeming shore. And the boxing version of that would be, give me your tired, your poor, your international drug cartel leaders, your octomoms. You know, it's just open for business to absolutely anybody. And obviously they don't even need to be involved in the sport to begin a career in it or to begin some form of enterprise within it, right? So like, I would stress that anybody who can make money within boxing will be welcomed into it, but they're not necessarily even making money for boxing per se, because boxing doesn't exist as a singular entity in that way. It's an industry, but it consists of multiple stakeholders who operate independently to one another. There's nobody overseeing it on a global level the way, say, a FIFA would with football, the way, in a more insular sense, like the GAA would with Gaelic games in Ireland. There is no boss, there's nobody to prevent it from happening, and it's ripe for the picking. And its participants, even professional, actual real-life boxers, have a history of being exploited by figures within it. But equally, the sport itself is just ripe for exploitation by external parties who can just stroll into it and they can use it to make money with virtually no supervision. And quite often, those third parties will bring with them people from outside of the sport, put them in a ring and look to make money in that way. And I guess if you were to try and figure out what was like the first proper celebrity fight, I would say throughout centuries of boxing, there have been probably many of them. The highest profile one that a lot of people would point towards, and I wouldn't even say that it was the start of this craze by any stretch, but it was just a bit of a milestone in the genre of celebrity boxing, was when Muhammad Ali fought a gentleman by the name of Lyle Alzado, who was a defensive end for the Denver Broncos NFL team in 1979. Now, Ali had just regained the heavyweight title against Leon Spinks, but he was over the hill. He was long past his best. As it transpired, Lyle Alzado, who had a background in amateur boxing before he had become a football player, handled himself pretty well. Ali was quite complimentary of him, obviously took it easy on him, probably had not really trained for the fight. But the genesis of that fight as an event was an effort to make money, right? Like it was a capitalist pursuit. It was an exhibition. Ali was guaranteed something like $250,000. So from his point of view, why would he not do it? He was at a stage of his career as well where he was being taken advantage of by people within boxing and some of the people around him. And then from Alzado's point of view, he saw it as an opportunity, firstly, to fight against the heavyweight champion of the world, his own rocky story. He had a little bit of a boxing background, as I mentioned. But also, he was stuck for money. He had a restaurant that wasn't doing especially well. He wanted to use the fight to grow his profile and gain a little bit of leverage in contract negotiations with the Denver Broncos. His employers, at the time he was on about 90 grand a year. He wanted to earn about 200 grand a year. He was supposed to be guaranteed 100 grand for this Ali fight, but that was only in the event, I think, that the event was a success in and of itself. So what transpired instead was, instead of 60,000 people piling into Mile High Stadium in Denver to watch Ali, and one of their own, Alzado, only something like 20,000 people turned up, only 11,000 of whom had actually paid to get in there. So the event was an unmitigated financial disaster. Alzado had actually put his house up as collateral to offset some of the promotional costs. And I don't know, I looked into this and there's no evidence to suggest that he lost his house in the end, but certainly he was in court for many years afterwards seeking some form of financial reward for his efforts that night. I think at one point he was awarded $90,000, but that was then overturned on an appeal. And I guess that was the first, let's call it celebrity fight, even though one of them was an actual boxer and one of the greatest boxers of all time, to garner some form of mainstream media attention in the States at least. And while it was a financial disaster, it probably gave birth to the idea that you could do this, and if you did it properly, maybe there would be financial reward at the end of it.
Aside from the money, do you think it is a thing of, as well, do you reckon any of them look at it and see it as like an actual challenge? And because I think the whole thing with celebrities is like perception and how they're perceived by fans, haters alike, whatever. Do you think they see it as like a chance to prove themselves in that way? Because I mean, obviously, like, it makes sense because it's like not a team sport. It's much more accessible in that way. And it's just you training for something very hard. Like, even if you don't really know boxing, you know what goes into making weight and stuff like that. Do you reckon there's an element to that? Or is it ultimately money talks?
No, I think 100% what you're saying applies to modern day celebrity boxing. Let's call I describe it as, say, like the top level of celebrity boxing, which in the grand scheme of things within boxing is not a very high level at all. But say we're going to be chatting about Jake Paul and Tommy Fury plenty, right? Now, Tommy Fury is obviously a boxer insofar as he had 13 or 14 amateur fights. I would suggest that he doesn't need to box. And in an ideal world, if I was part of his group of friends or family, I'd probably tell him, listen, you're a good looking man. You've done well for yourself. Like, what the hell are you doing, right?
And do the YouTube videos. You don't need to be doing this.
Well, Bambi's going to need a dad like who can lift her up when he's 40. You know what I mean? Or maybe not, actually. She'll be pretty old at that stage. That might be weird. But I just mean, like, you probably don't need to pursue this as a career. Now, the same applies to Jake Paul, right? But I absolutely believe that Jake Paul trains hard enough and has trained as a boxer on and off for probably 4 years now, and has had significant enough wins against, albeit mixed martial artists, and at that, mixed martial artists who were years over the hill and were pretty much climbing off the couch to fight him, where he would believe, I actually think I'm pretty good at this, right? Like, he's had some highlight reel knockouts in front of thousands of fans, millions of viewers around the world. They go viral every time because of his profile, and that will feed the ego of a man first and foremost, but especially a man who is putting in the work, who is buying into the kind of machismo of taking on a guy mano a mano, and who believes that, or will grow to believe that they're pretty much unstoppable. Like, I do truly believe that Jake Paul is deluded enough to think that he can make a dent in the sport at a pretty high level. Of course he won't. But eventually, I think to a degree, any boxer who gets in there to begin with, whether they're a celebrity or not, has to delude themselves into thinking that they are the best or that they can become the best, because otherwise it's an absolutely insane thing to do. Like, if you're not aiming to get to the very top of it, then why would you do it at all? You're getting punched in the face routinely. So I think Paul probably believes if he beats Tommy Fury, a supposedly real boxer, he moves on and maybe fights an even better boxer next time. One of the sanctioning bodies in real boxing, the WBC, who are a joke of an organization, but are one of the four main bodies that sanction real life fights between real life boxers, have said they'll put the winner of this fight into, I think, the top 40 of their world rankings, which is absurd, but they are absurd. And again, that will lend credence to Paul's delusions that he's actually on the right track here and that he can do something in the sport. And I think with the two of those guys, this fight between them isn't about money at all, really. It's a little sweetener at the end of it for both of them, but they have manufactured a feud, right? These two guys have absolutely no reason to cross paths in day-to-day life. Like, one of them is a former Disney star from America. The other is a Love Island star and the younger brother of the world heavyweight champion at the moment from England. And it's like, why would they have any problem with each other? But they've managed to manufacture a rivalry. And at a certain point, there's a threshold you cross where it doesn't feel manufactured anymore. You start to say hurtful things about one another, and suddenly you do want to take each other's heads off. And I think at the core of modern day celebrity boxing is this sense of settling scores. And I think that comes from the creation of, say, YouTube culture, or like, let's say the advent of YouTube culture, the creation of being a YouTuber as a full-time occupation. And I'm not talking about, say, somebody who has like a history channel on YouTube, or somebody who reviews movies or does like a feckin' 90-minute review of the latest episode of The Last of Us on a Monday morning, but more so people who exist as personalities on YouTube. In order to keep that interesting, I would suggest you probably need to have rivalries with somebody, right? It kind of reminds me of the guys from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. They often joke about, like, if they're doing something, it's like, well, who are we doing it against? You know what I mean? And maybe in order just to garner that little bit more attention, and also just retain the attention of your existing audience, you pick a fight with some rando. And the thing is, the audience is going to want to see a resolution in that rivalry that you've manufactured. And what better way and what cleaner way to do it, I guess, than in the confines of a boxing ring, where there are rules, where there will be an element of supervision, and where you can make an absolute killing from it and potentially do it again for even more money. So that's where it probably differs now to, say, Lyle Alzado fighting Muhammad Ali in 1979, I think Lyle Alzado looked at that as an opportunity to pay off some bills. The guys that are doing it now are probably chasing status more so than money, are probably actually, I don't want to say stupid enough, but because it feels unfair, but are probably deluded enough to thinking that it can be something they do long term. And hey, look, I guess it must be pretty fun. Otherwise, they wouldn't be doing it. Even aside from all of the training, the cutting weight, the horrific run up to a fight that I know firsthand from speaking to boxers and being around them when they're preparing for a fight, there has to be a gratification to it at the end of it. Otherwise, Jake Paul wouldn't have done it 4 or 5 times, and Tommy Fury wouldn't have done it as many times as he has.
That's the thing. And I think especially with the Pauls, like, they're not short of a few bob. You know what I mean? They have that weird drink thing, their own YouTube empires, podcasts. Like, they have other businesses coming out the wazoo. Like, I'm sure money, I think when you get to that level of earning that amount of money, like, I don't see how you can't turn the tap off. Like, how do you stop? But it definitely, you look at them and it's like, it has to be for status. And even the way they go, again, just using Jake Paul and Tommy Fury as an example, like, it's the thing of being able to go at each other on social media. And it's definitely the thing of being, and I know this is probably fair for most boxers, but it's the thing to be able to say, like, I won. And as you said, maybe actually, I think for the Pauls in particular, like, it's probably a credibility thing to be able to be like, oh yeah, well, this is just something I wanted to do. I started off as a YouTuber, but now I'm like actually defeating like people who are actual boxers and I've turned pro, you know?
Yeah, you're 100% right. And I think the appeal of this fight to anybody really, like, I'd stress that this fight doesn't necessarily appeal on a base level to a boxing fan. Somebody who stays up until 4 a.m. in Ireland watching a fight in America on, a Saturday night, Sunday morning is not going to be especially interested in a Jake Paul versus Tommy Fury fight because they're two relative novices, neither of whom probably deserve in boxing terms the attention that they receive even from within boxing circles. Like, a lot of actual boxing fans' issues with celebrity boxing outside of, say, the safety concerns and things like that is that it's actually a black eye for the sport and an embarrassment to the sport that guys can stroll in from other walks of life and make a bigger cultural impact than some of the actual world-class boxers that already existed within the sport. And like, to that, I would say tough shit, because the boxers who are actually doing this for a living, who have been amateurs since they were 5 or 6 years old, maybe go to the Olympics, they turn pro, they sign with promoters, they build their careers, climb the ladders, etc. They could be doing more on, say, social media to build their own profiles, in which case you'd have a more mainstream interest in what you were doing anyway. So I don't begrudge Tommy Fury or Jake Paul for the attention that they receive. I would say, as a boxing fan, watching some of the promotion in the lead up to their fight, it was jarring, I guess, that on a night about 3 weeks ago when an English fighter called Anthony Yarde was facing a Russian by the name of Artur Beterbiev in a light heavyweight world title fight, they brought Paul and Fury together in the ring afterwards to promote their fight, right? The reason why it was jarring is because the Yarde-Beterbiev fight, which turned out to be one of the fights of the year so far, an amazing spectacle, an amazing feat of courage and athleticism by both guys, was on normal BT Sport. So if you had a BT Sport subscription, you could watch it. It wasn't on pay-per-view. Mm-hmm. And suddenly these guys are paving the way, or sorry, I guess they exit stage left, Beterbiev won, and then you bring Tommy Fury and Jake Paul into the ring for a completely, like a little bit of a queasy, cringy, shouting match. Neither of these guys even really dislike each other under the surface, And it's been promoted as a box office fight on the same channel. So that fight will be on BT, but it'll be BT Sport box office, for which even BT Sport subscribers will have to pay extra money for the privilege of watching these two gentlemen go at it, right? Whereas they didn't have to pay extra to watch two legitimately world-class guys do it. So that's where it probably rankles with actual boxing fans. It's the sense that some of the some of the celebrity boxing stuff feels as though it's been put over the top, even within the sport. But again, the reason why that is the case is because that fight is going to make a killing for the people involved in it. It's going to make a lot of money for BT Sport. And I started by saying, I guess the appeal of this fight, if there is one to even an actual boxing fan, is just that primal thing of wanting to see a score settled with a pair of fists or two of them. And like, that doesn't appeal to everybody. I completely understand that. Even as somebody who covers boxing for my job or part of it, and as somebody who enjoys the sport, I particularly enjoy the characters and the stories involved in the sport. There are times when I watch two guys thumping heads off each other and it makes me feel uncomfortable. Like, I understand completely like the potential repercussions for the guys who get in there and do this. At the same time, it's not conscription. It's an opt-in thing. They've chosen this as their path in life, as their careers. But with a Paul Fury fight, which on paper shouldn't appeal to me at all, I am intrigued to watch it purely because at the end of it, one of them is going to be hugely, hugely embarrassed. Like, those are the stakes we're talking about. If you strip all of the bullshit and the sort of grandiose promotion of it away, the stakes are that one of them is going to have a reputational black eye because they've both been jawing at each other for months on end, probably years on end at this point. One of them is probably going to win and the other one is going to look like an absolute gobshite. That's pretty fun. You know what I mean? And I think if you start, as much as their verbal feud has been completely manufactured, if you start invoking people's family members the way Jake Paul has, in saying that Molly May probably made Tommy take this fight because she's sick of being the breadwinner, in saying that in saying that your family is going to disown you if you lose this fight, etc. Which, by the way, Tyson Fury, Tommy's older half brother, sort of alluded to, but I think jokingly. Like, those words do have meaning, even if this is purely business, right? Like, you can't say words out loud and not expect there to be like connotations to them, or expect them to carry a little bit of weight at least, because you are trying to hurt a guy's feelings. Like, that is what the point of those words are. So if you say all of this, for example, and you say, as Jake Paul has, this is the end of the road for you, Tommy. Enjoy your last couple of days as a boxer. You're written off after this. Your family's going to disown you, etc. And then you lose. That's going to be one of the funniest things ever. And that's the appeal of the fight to me, is that one of them is going to look like a real idiot. And by the way, on the flip side of it, Tommy Fury should beat Jake Paul. He's had more fights, both as an amateur and a professional, even if those have been like extraordinarily low-level fights. I mean, some of the guys Fury has fought as a pro have had maybe 1 or 2 wins and like 100 losses. They're career journeymen who basically earn their living by getting into the ring on a fortnightly basis, putting up some sort of an effort against an up-and-coming prospect, but losing almost deliberately, really, in that they don't actively try to win. They get their paycheck, they move on. It's an honest living. Tommy Fury has fought a good few of those and hasn't really been tested against anybody of note. He should still beat Jake Paul because he is more of a boxer, I would suggest, than Jake Paul is. But if he doesn't beat Jake Paul, and if the ex-Disney Channel YouTuber comes into your realm and embarrasses you, I mean, if I was his family, I would disown him at that point. So there you go. Those are the stakes. And to be honest, again, on a very fundamental level, that is pretty interesting. And that's where I wouldn't be, like, as I said at the very top of the show, I wouldn't be vehemently against it because for the most part, it is entertainment as we consume it. The only caveat being that it is incredibly dangerous entertainment that the two guys will be providing us.
The reason I wanted to do this episode was because I feel like there'd been a kind of a turning point in my mind as someone who obviously doesn't really engage with the sport at all. I was seeing like influencers and content creators. There's one specifically, her handle is Yodeling Hayley, but her name is Hayley Sharp. And if you are very online like me, you'll know that she made up the dance that went viral on TikTok for Say So, the Doja Cat song. And that's the only reason why I follow her. Like, she's a good choreographer otherwise, and she's actually quite funny, right? But then I was seeing her posts changed because I was seeing her train and talk about this boxing match. And I was just like, what the fuck is going on here? So then that led me to learn about this thing called Creator Clash that she was taking part in. And she was actually fighting an Irish Twitch streamer called Justa Minx, and Justa Minx ended up beating her or whatever, but I think she signed up to do the next one, Yodeling Haley, I should say, which is taking place, I think, later this year. I think it's April in Florida, of course. But I was just, and I suppose it was that, and I was also seeing, if anyone remembers, because I have to bring everything back to Love Island, AJ Bunker, who was on it a couple of seasons ago, she fought Elle Brooks recently again in this weird, and I think she stepped in for someone else. Anyway, I was just like, this is weird. Like, when did this become this? And I'm wondering, was the turning point the Pauls? Like, was that when it was like, okay, like anyone can just do this and you'll make a few bob and it's a bit of crack?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. It was the Pauls and I guess KSI, with whom I'm really unfamiliar still, to be totally honest. But those were the three guys that probably kickstarted this cultural movement, if you could go as far as to call it that. And I would suggest that because of their commercial success, because of their online success in boxing professionally, quote unquote, there's a sort of a trickle down effect to that, where some of the two women you mentioned there, they might not garner anywhere near the same attention as the Pauls or a KSI, but I mean, you heard about it, right? Like, it does make a little bit of a dent within the confines of their own followings, etc., and maybe increases those. And again, what you sort of, I guess it's the cross-pollination of competing against somebody else. Suddenly those two fan bases or two sets of followings are kind of intertwined. Maybe they're going at each other a little bit, but like, you're bound to have some sort of a spillover of people who are going to follow you as a result of you're fighting the person that they were already following, right? So like, even just in terms of reach, which is a really, probably an old-fashioned term at this point, maybe it makes sense. I think again, where I would draw is a distinction between, say, the women you mentioned there and some of the celebrity boxers in the modern age that are doing it, and say something like 2002 celebrity boxing series on Fox, which I'll try and get back to, is that the people who are doing it now are doing it of their own volition. I would suggest that quite often it's they who propose to, say, an agent or a manager or whoever that they would like to do it, rather than a letter coming in the door, as would have been the case in 2002, inviting you to partake in this celebrity boxing series on television. And typically that letter would have arrived at the doors of people who, now I'm talking about celebrities, but celebrities who were possibly vulnerable, stuck for money, etc., whereby it felt as though, to me anyway, looking back over that period of time, they were lured into it and very much exploited. I feel as though actually the people who do it now, the Twitch streamers, the YouTubers, the whoever else's, are almost exploiting the sport of boxing for their own gain. And again, I don't really hold that against them. The sport is there to be exploited in that manner. But I just think that's been the biggest flip between, say, two eras, the early 2000s of celebrity boxing and the present day. And I mean, even just to touch upon the Fox show that I mentioned, right? So this was a thing that ran on television in 2002 in America. And the idea was you had a couple of episodes, 3 or 4 fights on each episode between two celebrities. I guess it was like Celebrity Deathmatch minus the extraordinary violence and weaponry and whatnot. Just a boxing match, pretty short. But like, you had, say, Dustin Diamond, who played Screech in Saved by the Bell, was involved in that. Paula Jones, who had sued Bill Clinton for sexual harassment. Clinton was the president at that point, I guess. She wound up fighting Tonya Harding, the disgraced former ice skater, upon whom the Margot Robbie movie I, Tonya is based. And I wrote a piece on the 42 some years back about Tonya Harding's boxing career in and of itself, which was kind of remarkable and sad in its own ways. And it was just her really looking for a second chance in American society. I don't think there were too many cynical motivations within it. But like the maddest one from that Fox series, Celebrity Boxing, was Joey Buttafuoco, who was basically famous for being a child rapist, whose victim, Amy Fisher, had shot his wife in the face at one point. He boxed against a woman, China, from WWF wrestling, as it was then, WWE now. Some older wrestling fans who listen to the pod will be familiar with China. And like, China was a late substitute for this guy, John Wayne Bobbitt. he was famous for having his dick chopped off by his past wife while he slept, right?
Jesus Christ.
But he was removed from the card and replaced by China because he was found to be physically abusing his current wife, so a different woman to the one who had forcibly removed his penis. And like
God.
that was sort of the clientele we're dealing with. And I certainly don't mean to lump all of those people in together. They're not in the same bracket whatsoever. But just like if you took in isolation Joey Buttafuoco boxing a woman on Fox television in the States, and he was boxing China because his original opponent had been found to be physically abusing a woman, there is a certain... Okay, again, China has opted into this situation, but there is a weird optic thing going on there. Like, what better way to take a stance against domestic violence than have, a child rapist boxing a woman on national television, right? It's absolutely insanity. And even it's funny. I think I mentioned Octomom at the very top, and Amy Fisher, the woman who shot Joey Buttafuoco's wife in the face. Thankfully, she survived. Did she? I don't know. Listeners might have to Google that one.
I'll check that. It's fine. Don't worry.
Yeah. But Amy Fisher wound up fighting Octomom, I'm pretty sure, about 10 years later. So there was this weird... I think there was a very odd sphere of celebrity boxing going on in the States at that time. It probably didn't make an enormous cultural ripple, but certainly when it happened, these people would have gotten attention, a little bit of money, kept themselves in the headlines. I should stress as well, John Wayne Bobbitt did have his penis sewn back onto him, which I didn't even realize was anatomically possible. But I believe for a length of time, at least afterwards, he did still have a penis, which I guess is good. But you'd have to question as well what drove his wife to do that, So yeah, it's wait, sorry, no, not John Wayne Bobbitt. It was Joey Buttafuoco had his penis removed. Was it? Who cares?
Who cares?
The penis that was lost in that equation was restored.
For anyone who's unfamiliar as well, Octomom is Nadia Suleman, who just got famous for having octuplets, which is, that's not to say that that's not impressive, but that was her whole thing. You know what I mean? The word celebrity there is used loosely.
Yeah, and that's where I feel for some of those people, in that it was clear, I think, at that time that some of them were recruited as part of more of a freak show, I think. And I think there was an element in which organizers involved in this would have understood that there would be a gratification in watching, say, a Joey Buttafuoco. And yeah, sorry, I should stress, just having checked it, Buttafuoco's penis was fine. It was the other guy who had his penis chopped off. But, he was fighting China, a woman. There was probably something very deliberate in that. Reading about the fight, I think he was roundly booed throughout it. By the way, absolutely zero sympathy for the guy, fucking creep, right? But I just mean there were probably subliminal or I don't know, sort of interior motivations in the selection of some of these people. It was a television spectacle. You probably wanted people to be strongly rooting for one person and against another. And while you could absolutely argue that Buttafuoco deserves to have his head caved in by somebody like China, probably some of the people involved in that had reached a level of notoriety that was comparably harmless and did not deserve to be exploited in such a way. And I suppose the interesting aspect to that, to me, in the aftermath of it, is that as much as, yes, Amy Fisher wound up fighting Octomom years later, and of course there have been a few more, we might touch upon even Kim Kardashian and the Ricky Gervais thing. I know you mentioned those in our emails, but it didn't really take off either. So I wonder, and I can't speak from personal experience, I was 10 at the time and living across the Atlantic, but I wonder, did it sort of leave a bad taste where even viewers watching it were this isn't good in any way, really? I mean, firstly, the fights are going to be absolutely atrocious, right? If you were in any way interested in competitive sport, this isn't what you want to be seeing. You'd probably see a better fight outside your local kebab shop on a Saturday night. I don't know that it was ever going to be a spectacle in that way. And maybe because some of these celebrities were only tenuously famous, and some of them were clearly even evil characters, and others were just down and outs, it maybe felt as though this was a dark time for a couple of weeks on Fox, and let's move on from it as quickly as possible,
For sure, for sure. You mentioned Ricky Gervais there, and what's funny is that he fought Grant Bovey in 2002, and he came up on season 1 of Flop Culture, and we talked about his wedding to Anthea Turner, which may or may not have been sponsored by Cadbury, who can even say at this point. I didn't think I remembered this fight, but I feel like I remember the promos for it on TV more than the actual fight itself. What do you remember of it, if anything?
Virtually nothing, in all honesty. I just remember seeing clips of it subsequently, probably in the Twitter age, where it might have popped up once or twice. And I'm actually not even sure if I had BBC at the time when it would have aired, so I wouldn't even have necessarily been exposed to the build up to it. But because I knew we were going to be chatting about it, and because I obviously knew at this stage that it had happened, I sort of did read about it, and it's pretty fascinating in the sense that, like, firstly, that it was on BBC at all. I think it attracted something like 5.5 million viewers on BBC, which is pretty extraordinary. And it was interesting. I mean, firstly, it was a follow-up to a hugely successful event that had already aired on BBC, which was a fight between Bob Mortimer, the comedian, and Les Dennis, the actor. I think that had gotten about 6 million viewers. But soon after Bovey Gervais, it was sort of discontinued. And, like, it was sold as a grudge match, from what I can glean from, like, the residue of it online. And I read an interview with Gervais in Q magazine where he said the press tried to make it out as though it was a grudge match, but I'd never met the bloke, and I certainly have got nothing against him. Which is because I was like, what an extraordinary pairing, really, you know, to pit together for this grudge match. And I was trying to find, like, the origin of their feud, presuming it to be similar to celebrity boxing as we know it today, and there just was none. They just got picked. Gervais was doing The Office. Bovey was being Anthea Turner's husband, I guess. I don't really know.
I think it was, like, obviously this was, I was going to say it was Gervais's peak. I'm not really sure about that. But obviously, like, the popularity, like, skyrocketing with The Office. And then Grant was kind of enemy number one after the alleged SponCon wedding. Like, people were mad about that wedding. So basically, for anyone who hasn't listened to the episode, go back and listen to it. But essentially, they had this magazine deal with OK Magazine. When they were at the wedding, the photographer was like, can we get a pic of you eating a Cadbury snowflake or whatever? And they had loads of snowflakes there. And they were like, yeah, obviously, sure, whatever, right? Didn't think anything of it. This is what they say now, right? They alleged that OK had kind of gone away and done this, like, separate deal with Cadbury to tie in with the magazine deal. So the cover of OK Magazine is them getting married, but they're, like, eating like these white, or it's like flake with, like, white in the middle. And everyone was like, this is so naff. And, like, you sold the best day of your life away to, like, a chocolate bar. Like, they were, you know, when SponCon happens in this day and age, it's kind of like lol, and everyone has a lol about it privately, but nobody's in public being like, you should die, whatever. Like, Anthea Turner talks about the fact that she'd lost jobs over this. So I think it was probably a bit, if I was to speculate, I think it's probably a bit of that. You've, like, the golden boy of comedy, and then this businessman who sold his wedding for a chocolate bar, allegedly. Don't sue me, please.
Yeah, I think that makes absolute sense. And even in that Gervais interview, he sort of alludes to the fact that it was the media who created the good and bad dynamic between them. He was very much the hero to Bovey's villain, and he even didn't really understand that, I think. Some of the, like, his quotes about it are pretty funny in general. Like, he says, like, Gervais won the fight, but it was watching it back, it's just so bad. Like,
so it was three 90-second rounds.
Yeah. By the way, Rick Gervais, so he trained for 6 weeks, I think, for it. But he was trained by David Hay, who has gone on to do better things both in and out of the ring, I think it's fair to say. But that was...
Gavin, don't get me sued by anyone else.
I'm just saying he's a successful man. And, like, that is pretty funny on the face of it, that David Hay was willing to entertain this, right? Now, in fairness, he was probably firmly aware of the need to grow his own profile, which at that point in the UK even was non-existent. It was, I think, before he was even a cruiserweight world champion, certainly before he went on to achieve kind of more mainstream fame as a heavyweight. But Gervais says, I think I won on points because I lent on him heavier than he lent on me. I wouldn't fight again. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. Considering I don't do anything else, panel shows or game shows, I just chose the worst one I could ever do, apart from I'm a celebrity, get me back on the telly, I'll eat a spider. Christ knows what I was thinking. And yeah, I think a lot of celebrities who go into it have a similar sort of a reaction where it's almost a relief to escape from it with your faculties intact, and you probably never wish to do it again. And others, younger guys, like both of them were 41 at the time. So a lot of the criticism in Britain towards it from the boxing community at the time was met with the response from the organisers, well, you know, they're wearing head guards, I think, and it's basically an amateur fight. What's the big deal? But at the time, you couldn't fight as an amateur above the age of 35 in the UK under British Boxing Board of Control rules. So they were well older than that. And obviously at that age, if you're fighting for the first time, it's a lot more dangerous. But yeah, I don't know that it was either man's finest hour, really. But isn't it funny, exactly as you say, about the Swan Con and the wedding aspect to Turner and Bovey's, you know, roller coaster romance? If that happened now, I feel, depending on who was involved, I feel as though people would nearly applaud them for it or embrace it. It'll be like, well, you know, weddings are fucking expensive, so good for you.
100%. Like, it's so, we talked about on that episode about like Nick Jonas and Priyanka Chopra Jonas now are probably the best example of it. Like, there was not, they monetized every single aspect of their wedding. And it was like, I was just like, gas. Like, if I was famous, to be honest, I also think I'd do the same. Like, it makes sense, but it's just nuts.
If you're living in a universe in which your wedding is going to be discussed ad nauseum in like gossip columns or whatever the modern version of that is, I guess, websites. I'm not that old, right? But like, you know, if it's going to become part of the online discourse, and like, I would suggest there are probably going to be photographers outside of it, even if they're not allowed into it, etc., then why not turn a little windfall on it? Like, you know what I mean? Like, if people are going to make it their business to know what your wedding was like, then fucking open the doors, make your coin. I wouldn't begrudge anybody. And it is interesting the extent to which maybe society's interpretation of that has shifted in 20 odd years, you know.
For sure. You mentioned there that Ricky spent 6 weeks training for this match. Someone who did not train for 6 weeks, only trained for a week, according to her, was Kim Kardashian. She took part in a boxing match in 2009 against Tamara Frappicella. If you are very into keeping up with the Kardashians, I didn't actually realise this was documented on the show. It was season 4, episode 6. The episode is called Body Blows. I don't know why I was surprised that this was on the show. Like, they don't do anything without it being content that they can shill or whatever. She did it back in 2009, as I said. It was part of, they were all fighting, loads of members of the family, and they were all raising money for this Dream Foundation, which helps terminally ill adults. I think Caitlyn at the time did really well in her match, and then Rob Kardashian didn't do as well, ended up in hospital.
He got battered.
Kim didn't know if she was going to do the match, and then was like, I didn't want to be, you know, the whole thing of like, but I didn't want to let my family down. So then she went
like
in.
Tommy Fury.
Absolutely, yeah. She ended up losing to Tamara, and she claims it's the most pain she's ever been in her life. So there you go.
Well, you know, when I was looking over this, because again, I actually wasn't aware that she had ever fought, and I won't pretend to sort of be completely in tune with what the Kardashians do ever, really. But you know, also more luck to them. I you know, they don't cross my radar too often, I guess, but I've nothing against them. But looking over it, what struck me mostly was, well, firstly, as you point out, the fact that it was on the show, because I didn't realize the show actually goes back that far. And you were saying it's season 4, which is even weirder to me. But secondly, I think they only raised about $11,000. At least that's what
miserable.
At least that's what I read in one the only article I read about it. I'm not going to lie, but it said, or maybe it was Kim's fight specifically. But even that alone, if Kim's fight only raised $11,000, you'd actually be thinking, why didn't you just put the hand into the pocket? Even then, you surely had 11 grand to spare, and spare yourself in the process, the most painful experience you've ever had, or whatever. But like, as much as we can sort of laugh about that now, and we absolutely should, the Rob Kardashian one is sort of interesting to me insofar as, while I accept that, or while I presume rather, that most people don't really give a shit about Rob Kardashian in a general sense anyway compared to the others, like, that shows the potential pitfalls of this. He went in and he fought some guy who apparently had a little bit of training. Kim made him out to be like a professional fighter. I really strongly doubt he was, but you know, a guy who maybe was hitting the gym once or twice a week at the very least, hitting a heavy bag, is going to be more prepared for it than Rob. And as you say, Rob got concussed. He spent, I think he spent the night in hospital. He was being monitored. And that's where you're like, this, we can absolutely laugh about the whole thing, and we should. But in reality, when two people meet in the middle of the ring, is actually not a joke. And that's where a lot of the, I guess that's where a lot of the criticism towards it comes from. It actually comes from a good place for the most part. I'm not even saying it's my own criticism necessarily, but just in the discourse around this, a lot of people are like, well, what if somebody gets gravely injured doing this? And like, you know, around the Gervais Bovey fight, the promoter Frank Warren, who's now Tyson Fury's promoter, if people haven't heard of him, had some pretty strong quotes about it. And while I wouldn't really, how would I phrase this delicately? I would take everything Frank Warren says with a cholesterol raising pinch of salt, right? But like, he says it's a very dangerous sport and it needs to be regulated properly. This is about the Gervais Bovey thing. You can't just go to the gym for 6 weeks and think you're a boxer. It takes a long time and a lot of dedication. All of that is fine, right? Makes sense. Maybe a little bit of sour grapes. He didn't get in on the action. You know what I mean? He probably couldn't get fights of his own on the BBC at that time, and suddenly it's two celebrities fighting in front of 5.5 million people. But where he actually nails it, I think, is he says, the brain doesn't distinguish whether it's being hit by a professional or an amateur. If, heaven forbid, something should go wrong, people won't be saying, let's ban The Office or whatever Grant Bovey does. They'll be calling for a ban on boxing. And that's probably the nub of the issue as far as a lot of boxing fans see this, is that, and it kind of dovetails with what I'm saying about the sport being exploited by these external third parties, is that if trouble ensues, it's boxing that will probably be in trouble at the end of it. Even though I said it's not a singular entity, it'll be whoever sanctioned the fight in a given location. It'll be the broadcasters who decided to show it. And these are the very same broadcasters that actually do show proper professional boxing. And the fallout will be contained within the sport for something that the sport itself didn't ask for, if that makes sense. So that's where it probably leaves a sour taste for some people. But I, again, would draw a distinction between that and like a Jake Paul, Tommy Fury fight. These are guys who have trained sufficiently to at least have the right to box, I would suggest. And everybody's got to start somewhere. A lot of fights that we see on television in normal professional boxing cards are probably of, you know, a similar or even lower standard than Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. And there are certainly mismatches that we see almost every weekend where some prospect who has a serious amateur pedigree fights some tomato can that they've pulled out of Supermax for the weekend or whatever and gives them an absolute hiding. And that's pretty dangerous as well. So the sport shouldn't be on its high horse necessarily. But I do think the criticism around safety and the potential repercussions within the sport is valid.
On criticisms, I wanted to put this quote to you from Jonathan Liu. He wrote this in The Guardian, I think it was this year, and I'll link it below in the show notes. Perhaps the most arresting aspect of influencer boxing, a relatively recent phenomenon in which social media stars slap each other around for a couple of minutes to frankly astonishing audience numbers, is how keen it is to cloak itself in the togs of proper sport, and proper sport as in inverted commas. There are actual commentators saying actual boxing things. After his victory, KSI gets handed a belt for an entirely made-up title. On social media, fans analyse the fight in earnestly granular detail, discuss the potential next opponents for KSI. For me, the really interesting part of this is why hundreds of thousands of people are so invested in a product that, by any objective sporting standard, is not very good.
Yeah. And like, I understand that completely. I mean, I would probably agree with every word of it in the sense that it does astonish me, but only sort of to a degree, because as much as I, from the outside of influencer boxing looking in, will turn my nose up at belts and all of the the granular detail in which some of these guys' fans will break their fights down in. You know, I also know people who will sit down on a Wednesday night and watch Fair City or whatever. Like, this is ultimately entertainment, and like, I can't say that I especially enjoy Fair City or Love Island or whatever, but that's how some people escape from their, you know, from the rat race and unwind on a given evening. And like, you add to the equation then that a lot of these people who watch influencer boxing have an emotional investment and maybe even a parasocial relationship with some of the people involved in the ring. And, you know, it sort of makes sense to me that they would want to follow through some of these manufactured feuds on YouTube and on social media as far as the ring where it actually reaches its resolution. Like, why would they park it on the Friday night of the weigh-in and just not watch the fight? Like, if you're following these guys' lives and these women's lives, then you're probably going to be interested in the fight ultimately. Like, there is a winner and a loser at the end of this. As I mentioned with Jake Paul and Tommy Fury, for example, the stakes in that regard are pretty high. And I don't judge anybody for being interested in it, even if aesthetically it's appalling to me, because I'm not in their shoes, and I'm not, as much as I don't follow these people's lives in any way, and I actually don't understand the appeal of kind of YouTubers of their ilk. I also probably watch loads of things that you or other people would be like, what a weirdo. You know what I mean? Like, I've been really getting into like YouTube videos at the moment about what life was like on Earth 300,000 years ago and things like that. You know what I mean? And I'll sit down with like a glass of wine and just try and figure out what the Neanderthals were up to or whatever, you know? And that's me unwinding on a Wednesday. So, outside of sport and having friends, I swear. So like, yeah, do you know what I mean? But like, it's like, it's all well and good, I guess, to say it's astonishing and all that, but that's coming from the perspective of somebody who doesn't enjoy it. And who probably, and not to cast aspersions on Jonathan, but who probably doesn't give a shit one way or another about a Jake Paul or a Logan Paul or whoever. And like, Jake Paul, by the way, has permeated the sport now to a far more significant degree than anybody else. Okay, granted, his brother Logan fought Floyd Mayweather in a kind of an exhibition bout and didn't disgrace himself by any means. But Paul has a role in the sport which goes beyond his output in the ring, in the sense that he ostensibly manages Amanda Serrano. She's managed by his company, MVP Promotions. Amanda Serrano is a terrific boxer from Brooklyn, originally Puerto Rico, who would be better known to some of your Irish listeners as Katie Taylor's arch nemesis in professional boxing. They're fighting again in Dublin in May. They fought last at Madison Square Garden in April of last year. Just a tremendous fight. And Jake Paul, because of his profile, was able to almost via osmosis raise the profile of Amanda Serrano to the degree that she got a lot more money for that fight, into seven figures, probably just upwards of $1 million, than she would have otherwise. And again, it'll be the case for the rematch, where in the past Amanda Serrano would have been earning, I don't know, probably at most 100, 150 grand. She's into the millions now, and it's probably because she hitched her wagon to Jake Paul in a business sense. And like, I met Jake Paul during fight week several times in New York last year. I was lucky enough to be over there covering the Taylor Serrano fight. And one thing I probably should point out is that as much as his personality that I see online doesn't appeal to me in any way, it is an act. Like, when you speak to him off the record or just by the side of the ring while the fighters are working out or whatever, he's actually a pretty polite, friendly enough guy. Like, from what I could glean anyway, it's a very limited sample size. So I don't really know what I'm trying to say to that, other than maybe the entire product should be taken with a pinch of salt, at least until they step into the ring, because as much as, say, the personalities of some of these guys or some of the trash talk or whatever wouldn't appeal to people necessarily, it certainly appeals to enough people that they pack stadiums and sell pay-per-views and make a lot of money for it. And also, I guess the point that I'm actually trying to make is that they're being very smart in how they're doing it. Like, they're warping their own personalities in a way and creating them to maximize their earnings, maximize their exposure. and they have infiltrated the sport to the point that they're beginning to supersede even some of the guys who are very good at it. So, yeah, good luck to them, I guess.
Gav, this has been fascinating. I'm just obsessed. I'm so grateful you came on. I really, really appreciate it. Where can people read more of your work, listen to you, engage more in sports? Because I think I might have to draw the line here with flap culture, but there's so much more out there that you have.
Sure. Look, you'll probably find me around the place, I guess. Just, the 42, I work for the 42, so I should mention that. I know you mentioned it at the top.
Why wasn't that the first thing you said?
I don't know. Apologies. All views are my own. I should stress that as well. But no. I guess it's just that I don't write about celebrity boxing, so you might be let down if you follow me on Twitter or if you follow my work on the 42. But mainly rugby focused at the moment with the Six Nations. But as I say, I'll be knocking around Twitter and stuff, and anybody with any stern thoughts on it, by all means, get in touch with Fionnuala.
Don't send them to Gav, he's not interested. You are more than welcome to come back at any stage to talk about a flop movie or album, just so you're aware. I don't just want to mine you for your intellect. You can come back and have a chat about that at any time. So have a think, and we'll get you back in the hot seat. But until then, Gavan Casey, an absolute pleasure to have you on Flop Culture.
Thanks a million. Chat soon.
And as mentioned at the end there, Gav writes for the 42 and he's on a lot of their podcasts talking a lot of sense about sport, and I will link everything below if you want to check out more of that. Otherwise, it's been a pleasure. The same usual spiel. Reviews are always appreciated. We are creeping towards the 200 reviews on Spotify. Thank you very much for that. Really appreciate it. And also if you leave a review on Apple Podcasts, 5-star I should say, I will recommend a personalised bop or flop to you. So please don't hesitate to leave a review if you've been thinking about it. It helps more people find the show, and I just love it. It makes me really happy. To quote Marge Simpson, I just think it's neat. We are at flopculture_pod on Instagram and TikTok. I am Fionnuala J, at Fionnuala J, everywhere you can find me on social media. This podcast has been edited by Adam Shanahan. Artwork is by Brian Lambert. And until the next time, mind yourself. Bye.